Okay, welcome and welcome back to Unapologetically Black Unicorns. I am, as usual, well, maybe I'm not usual today. Okay, what I am is excited. I'm always excited to have a fantastic, fantabulous, wonderful, wondiferous, any other adjective, person who has joined me on the podcast today as a guest, and that is Dr. Andre Johnson. Now, I met Andre probably, I don't know how many years ago. We're not going to be aging ourselves these days, but I met him probably at some kind of SAMHSA recovery meeting. I wasn't even working at SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And we kept running into each other. And I thought, who is this dude with the dreadlocks, a black dude from Detroit? And he's like, got it going on. So I got to know him a little bit through my other colleague, Wilma Townsend. So I'm not going to say much about Andre other than I admire his work. We'll be talking about his book, but I'm going to let Andre introduce himself. So, Andre, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Karis, for allowing me to be on your show. It's truly an honor to be a part of this podcast. A little bit about myself. I am a person in long-term recovery, and what that means is I haven't used drugs or alcohol in over 36 and a half years. Consequently, I'm also the president and chief executive officer of a nonprofit in the city of Detroit entitled the Detroit Recovery Project. And we both know if it wasn't for recovery, I certainly wouldn't be able to lead an organization. I wouldn't be able to be a father to my daughter. I wouldn't be able to be a present husband to my wife. So I'm always honored to talk about the importance of recovery impacts everybody. And so when we talk about the recovery ecosystem, we're really looking at the systems that impact individuals' recovery process. A little bit about DRP, known as Detroit Recovery Project. We're a peer-led, peer-driven, certified behavioral health clinic where we've been able to integrate both mental health or behavioral health, which is comprised of both mental health and substance use disorder services, as well as physical health services, meaning that we have a team that's comprised of primary care physician, nurse practitioners, registered nurse, psychiatrists, psychologists, master level social workers, as well as peers to really bring a holistic approach. And that's really the purpose behind the recovery ecosystem is really taking that holistic approach to helping to meet people where they are. We are a community-based organization. We have two locations here in the city of Detroit. There's an east side and a west side location, and they're both off of a bus route and very easily accessible.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit because I did hear you say this before, and now all of a sudden it is sticking in my brain. So, your organization is a CCBHC, a Certified Behavioral Health Clinic, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it's peer run.
Yes.
Because you hear what I'm doing here, right? So a lot of times peer run organizations see their work as peer only, like we only hire peers, we only provide peer services. And I've been thinking more and more as somebody who ran a peer run organization about, well, wait, I'm a community-based organization that is run by people with lived experience that can offer a whole range of services inclusive of peer services. So when I was CEO of Project Return Peer Support Network in Los Angeles, we brought on occupational therapists because we really had a need for more occupational therapists working with some of the people we were serving to help them better work in their employment or do vocational activities, etc. So we started to branch out a little bit, but you just said, wait, we're a CCBHC. You didn't start off as a CCBHC because that's new, right?
Correct.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about that, and then we're going to get into the book, but tell me a little bit about that.
So we started the nonprofit officially in 2000. So we've now been operating over 20 and a half years. When we first started, it was all peer-led, peer-ran, peer-driven 100%. There has been a shift. We've evolved as an organization. I've evolved as an individual, meaning that I've invested in my education. I'm also a clinical psychologist by trade. And for me, as I began to dive into that space, I began to really learn more about mental health services. So, one of the successes of our RCO has been historically collaborations. And so, we've always partnered with local hospitals, Detroit Medical Center, Henry Ford Hospital. We partnered with Barbara Carmanos. We partnered with University of Detroit Dental School, and having those strong partnerships help to bring those services to our community. And so, for example, we discovered we had women who were 40, 50 years old, never had a mammogram. We had men 50, 60 and plus years old, never had a prostate exam. People never had dental cleaning in 20 years. People hadn't had physical health checkups or a primary care physician. So I thought, what better population need these services than the people we serve? Because we know that once people abstain from drugs, other addictions tend to manifest. And the number one is food and sex. And I realized that we got to address those issues too. I didn't know it in the very beginning, but now we have the capability of testing people for HIV, testing people for hepatitis C, testing people for other infectious diseases.
Mm-hmm.
Our agency was instrumental in distributing the vaccine,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
controversial vaccine. But
Mm-hmm.
I also see firsthand the number of people who died from COVID-19 in the city of
Yeah.
Detroit,
Yeah.
who were predominantly Black in the state of Michigan.
Right.
And the people who were dying were people who had other chronic and comorbid diseases. And so for me, the CCBHC made sense, and it was an excellent fit to try to really make a difference and change the social determinants of health in Detroit.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the fact that it's this idea of not just the collaborations, but also how do you take a recovery orientation, which comes from sort of the peer leadership and the peer visions and values and practices, and cross them over with the rest of the health ecosystem when you shift to that CCBHC. So, and that I brought up the word system, so now we're going to talk about recovery ecosystem because you created an ecosystem of sorts. There's still more to that ecosystem, but you have a wonderful book called The Recovery Ecosystem. Can you talk a little bit about what does that mean? Like, what is the recovery ecosystem?
Sure. And thanks for asking that question. Like when I mentioned earlier, collaborations, partnerships, when people are seeking recovery, whether it's from substance use disorder, whether it's from mental health needs, I think it's important that we have systems in place that can bridge the gap. So you talked earlier about vocational. We've been working with our state. Our state has a department called Michigan Rehabilitation Services, and they've been instrumental in helping support people's journey, whether it's go to barber school, whether it's become a plumber, whether it's cosmetology. So I think vocational and educational should be a system that's part of the overarching recovery ecosystem. And now we know everybody doesn't necessarily aspire to go to college or to go to trade school or even to pursue a skill, but at least we want to have systems in place that are friendly towards this community, towards our community, because our community still struggles with, as we know, stigmatization. Um, and so for me, it's how do I continue to break down the barriers and how do I continue to build systems that's going to support our community. And so for me, writing this book, Recovery Ecosystem, it really gleans from a variety of my personal experience and interaction with others. And moments like I was on an airplane with a guy flying to Charleston, and he and I were the only two Black males with dreadlocks on the plane sitting next to each other. I'm weighing 280 pounds and he weighed 320 pounds. So I wasn't necessarily happy to be sitting next to the brother, but when I began to engage in a conversation with the brother, he told me he had just got released from prison. He had 10 years more to do, but he
Mhm.
got out 10 years earlier.
Mhm.
And he was probably in his early 30s. And I was just, talking to him, and he was like, "Yeah, when I get out, I want to go get purple mocha." I said, "I'm sorry, can you say that again?" Because he had this real thick Southern accent. He said, "Well, purple mocha." And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't really hear you because the propellers in the plane." And when he said it the third time, I was able to decipher what he was saying. And he was saying, "I want to get a pedicure and a manicure when I get out. And I want to get out and I want to see my mother because my mother was crying of joy on the phone when she discovered that I was going to be released from prison." So, needless to say, we talked all the way until the plane landed. And when the plane landed, I remember walking. And as I walked outside, I remember seeing two brothers who had on white t-shirts, gold chains, dark sunglasses, and saggy pants. So you know what I said to myself: these is homeboys. And and I was like, it don't look good because they wearing dark sunglasses at 10 o'clock in the morning. So, needless to say, I make it over to the hotel, get checked in. I do what I had to do for the day. And then about 7 o'clock that night, I decided to go to the local mall. And so when I had gone to the mall, homeboy was at the mall with wearing his prison uniform, wearing his prison flip-flops. He was with his homeboys, and I can tell he had been smoking marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
So I called him the next morning. "Hey, how did it go with mom's? Woo, woo, woo." And he said, "I haven't made it to my mother's house. I've been drinking and smoking all night. I've been throwing up. The guys threw a party for me." And I was thinking, wow, this brother, homeboy, ain't been out 24 hours and he's already practicing self-destructive behavior. And that moment was when I thought about ecosystem because those homeboys was part of his ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, ecosystem are both internal and external variables that influence our behavior. And so for me, is how do we begin to dive deeper and look and explore our ecosystems? And part of that is how do we think? Do we think, are we full of negative thoughts? Or do we think thoughts of positivity, thoughts of optimism, thoughts of being ambition? Or how do we need to even rewire our thoughts? Because sometimes our experiences shape our thoughts. And the things that shape our experiences are what? Internal experiences, how we feel on the inside, and external experiences, our experiences we have with our family members, our community, and our church. And those experiences, in most cases, when they're negative, they resonate with us. And so the book is a tool to really take a holistic approach to one's recovery.
In your own recovery, and I love that story because I think it really illustrates that he had an ecosystem. And we were talking about like risk factors or protective factors, right? That and he had friends, but the friends were probably a risk factor for him versus a protective factor for him, if I've got that right. And how do we help people kind of step back and think about, well, for their own recovery ecosystem, what is going to help me versus what is going to harm me? Maybe that's another way of putting it as well. So in your own life, like did you even realize that you didn't have a complete recovery ecosystem if you look back or look forward? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. In fact, that was part of the inspiration for writing the book. So that's a really good caveat. When I entered recovery at the age of 18 years old, I really didn't have a lot of family support. My mother was a hardworking woman who worked on average 10 hours a day as a registered nurse for the Department of Corrections. I didn't have my biological father wasn't in my life, and my stepfather wasn't a role model at all. And so I kind of grew up in this sort of toxic environment where most of the people I knew were dealing drugs, selling drugs, or doing something shady, so to speak. And so for me, I knew in order for my recovery to thrive, I was going to have to make some environmental changes, but I also had to make some internal changes. I had to really learn how to dive deep and learn why I had so many negative thoughts. I mean, I was 19 years old talking about life is a bee. you live and you die. I ain't even lived in 19 years old.
Hmm.
So I had to change my environment. I made a commitment to go to church. I made a commitment to go to 12 steps. I made a commitment to sing in a choir. I made a commitment to go to college. I made a commitment to get my GED. And so doing all those things, I always had experiences with other people that that fed me and supported me along my journey. And so as the more I began to walk down that path in that new recovery journey, I always had people who were able to help guide me. And having that type of ecosystem changed the trajectory of my life.
Yeah. And when we talk about recovery, I know there are definitions for recovery, and probably many of my listeners are familiar with the SAMHSA definition. There are other definitions as well. Do you find that some of them are too individualistic that don't think about all of those other things, or do you know? I don't know. I was just thinking of that as you were talking about, who guides us into thinking about not just internally but externally in the things that we're connected to. Does the definition of recovery capture that? And that's why we have to talk about not just recovery, but recovery ecosystem.
Yeah, so I think SAMHSA focus is kind of broad in terms of health and wellness, but I
Hmm.
think in order for individuals to successfully achieve health and wellness, they're going to have to be involved in some type of system. I mean, recovery is a individualistic uh, approach, or not approach, or concept. Recovery, people have to embrace and empower recovery. And once you can embrace and empower that recovery is important to you, then that's when you want to make sure that you begin to align your recovery with systems that's going to support your journey. And health and wellness is something that's been coined by SAMHSA in terms of health and wellness and potentiality for individuals. And that's something that's been coined over the last probably decade or so now. But the recovery term has itself has continuously evolved. And we also know that recovery is non-linear. Everybody recover at their own pace.
Hmm.
And there's nothing definitive about recovery itself other than ultimately we want to ensure that individuals are living a meaningful, purposeful life and a life, where people are conscious of their own health and wellness because that's important.
Yeah. You're bringing up, and I'm going to circle this back to your CCBHC because in my own journey, I had a physical health problem, and it was suggested that I go to urgent care. And each time I said, no, I think it's something else. And no, 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 just do this, gargle. We don't want to give you an antibiotic, which I was fine with that. And then when I finally ended in the ER, because at that point I had lost feeling, I totally lost feeling. I couldn't feel my feet. I couldn't feel my head. It was like everything was like numb. And my father's like, you're having a stroke. You need to go to the hospital. So I drive myself to the hospital if I'm having a
Mhm.
stroke, which was sort of stupid. But so I get to the ER, they see my diagnosis in the chart, and at that point, they're telling me what I'm feeling is not real, which was really interesting. And I sat there and I said, no, no, it's real. And also, my voice had changed. My voice had turned into this very earthy, breathy, sort of Lauren Bacall, heavy, deep female voice, which I have a deep female voice anyway, but it got real sexy real fast because I couldn't really like make my vocal cords work. And well, anyway, it turned out, long story short, it turned out that I had thyroid cancer. They were going to turn me away. I wouldn't leave. And after about 6 or 7 hours of sitting and staring directly at the person in the ER who was doing the intake, they finally said, just come on back. We'll take your temperature or whatever. And when they drew my blood, they also, drew my blood. At that point, they saw all of my levels were off. But this goes to something that I'm thinking about is when a CCBHC is run by people with lived experiences. I'm gonna hope and assume and think that it's harder to dismiss somebody because of stigma. it's harder to say, oh, you're here because you're drug seeking. Oh, you're here because whatever. And I wouldn't doubt, as a Black person, they thought I was there because of drug seeking, as well as seeing a diagnosis of schizophrenia and thinking, oh, it's all in her head. So, I mean, do you have people who ever, I mean, do you feel that way as
That was
well?
part of the catalyst for me, Karis, of bringing in the CCBHC because I had conversations with men who were long-term recovery, but they were also former IV drug users. And they shared with me their experiences of going to the medical doctor's office and feeling the stigma when a woman, when a nurse is unable to find a vein, and how that contributes to ultimately poor health. And
Mhm.
so for me, it's, yeah, now we have a team, a medical doctor and nurse practitioners who welcome our people,
Yeah.
and welcome our people without judgment.
Right, right. And when you're putting your CCBHC as part of the recovery ecosystem, how do you connect people to the other factors that make up the recovery ecosystem? Do you want me to read them off?
Yeah, please, you got the
All
book.
right, so you have the components of the recovery ecosystems as healthy friendships, reframing one's thought processes, self-help support groups,
Let me just
recreational,
interject for a minute.
yeah,
So the first, what's the first one?
healthy friendships.
That was one that was important to me because, and that kind of came a lot from my personal experiences because I had to redefine what friendship meant. You know,
Mm,
um, a friend is not a person who co-sign BS. You know what I mean? If
yes.
I say I'm about to go do something that can perhaps get me locked up or cause me injury, I think it's really so. I thought healthy friendships was an important part to be able to allow people to like reflect and really, first of all, redefine what healthy friendship looks like. Because some people, I think, depending upon how you've been raised, that determines what a healthy friendship looks like. And so we identify protective factors, we've identified risk factors. And so it's up to the individual to identify the protective factors that contribute to healthy friendship. And then we talk about the second chapter, reframing one's thoughts. Again, it's countering, it's challenging some of the negative, distorted thoughts that we have as
Hmm.
individuals and how we allow those thoughts, because once you can change a person's thinking, then you can change their action. So it's
Yeah,
hard to, change if you're still acting under a false belief system.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
when you talk about thirdly, self-help groups, you got AA, you got NA, you got Food Anonymous, you got Fellowship Anonymous. It's a variety of support groups that people can access with no cost. All
Hmm.
you got to do is show up, and you'll have a group of people that have the same story that you have. And
Hmm.
I think, and I'm not always sure if we're getting the information out. And
Yeah.
so it was important to identify and talk about 12-step groups. And then also mutual aid groups,
Hmm.
because the recovery process sometimes can be a lonely process for some people. And I think people, and we've all learned this during the pandemic, we need our social interaction. We need opportunities to interact with people that look like us, with people that experience what we've experienced, because we are operating in a world that still significantly stigmatize our world. And we got to break that cycle.
I love that. And when I read the first one, Healthy Friendships, and read through the chapter, I was thinking myself too about the process I had to go through to understand, first of all, what was a friendship. I didn't even have healthy in there, because, I'm an army brat, talked about it on my podcast before. I don't find it bratty, but global nomad. And so I spent, the first half of my life really traveling around every 3 years. And so I would, have my classmates for 3 years, and then it would be a brand new set of people and another set of people. So I didn't really understand what friendships were, to begin with. And then when somebody said, well, a friend is somebody who will, hang out with you or be with you or go places with you, I was like, oh, okay, that's what it is. Yeah, but that might not be healthy because they might not be taking you healthy places. So, they might not really have your back or things like that. So I really appreciate the fact that you put healthy in front of the word friendship. So you
Oh,
have,
yeah.
examine what is friendship, and then what about that friendship is healthy for you. So we also have things like recreational activities, employment, education,
Yeah,
physical
so let
health.
me just dive in the
Okay.
recreational part that I found was really beneficial when we started our recovery community center. We had a basketball team called Recovery Warriors. We had a bowling league. We had a softball team. We had a dominoes club. These guys play dominoes. They talk about each other so bad. You think you'd be listening to
Hmm.
Red Fox and Martin Lawrence the way they be talking about each other. So, and it was through those experiences and interaction when we would have sober parties every week and people be dancing. They have dance competitions, and you would swear somebody was drinking. All they drinking was coffee and Coca-Cola, and having fun, sober fun. So
Hmm.
I learned and realized having those environments are important because again, when I got clean at 18, I needed to do something with all this energy. So playing basketball was my outlet. Going to dance, I learned how to dance at a dance. I couldn't dance. I had two left feet,
Mm.
but I learned how to dance. I learned how to interact. I learned how to have fun, clean and sober.
Yeah.
Because for some reason, it was frowned upon to live drug free, criminal free, alcohol free.
Mm.
So you're talking to somebody who has learned how to have fun, okay?
Yeah.
And so recreation or whatever your recreation can be, traveling. When I lived in Los Angeles, one of the things I fell in love with doing the mountain walks,
Hmm.
climbing the trails. I found fun is having an opportunity to swim on a regular basis. So I think recreation having something again to allow you to exert energy is viable to sustaining a health and wellness recovery.
Right, right. Yeah, I love that. I wasn't very good at the recreational thing. I can dance though. I do like that.
No, that's
When
that's, that's a good
when I was
thing.
with my cousin, like the thing that we would do is he taught me how to roller skate. And so back in the day, we were, disco roller skating, like that
Yes,
was the jam. And
yes.
just about a year ago, I was like, I should buy some roller skates. Actually, no, it was several years ago. But I was told I couldn't roller skate because of the thyroid thing. I had low calcium, and they're like, "You look at a pair of roller skates and you're going to break a leg." I was like, "Oh, dang," because I wanted to be in a roller derby. And they're like, "No." But
Wow.
now I have a pair of roller skates and actually do roller skate. So yeah.
Wow.
So we have employment. Um,
Obviously, employment is important for a lot of people. People need an income. And so we got to be able to help people decipher basic things like, establishing a resume, establishing a bio, find out what aligns with what you want to do and how do we get there.
mhm.
And then obviously following employment, it can be educational, vocational. And again, it's really being true to thine own self to determine where you want to go in life
Yeah.
and know that recovery, there's no limits.
Hmm.
Dreams awaken when we stay on this recovery journey. And
Yeah.
so I know people who've been successful during many phases of life.
Hmm.
I know judges, I know lawyers, I know politicians, all in recovery. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And watching people obtain what it is that they desire
Hmm.
through education.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to ask about supportive housing because that becomes one where we're hearing again a lot of rhetoric about housing first, supportive housing. We don't shouldn't have you. All right, so what is supportive housing? Because I think we hear the word, we think fidelity to a model, but you're just talking about something about, tell me what you're talking about when you say supportive housing as
Yeah,
part of the
so for me, again, when we talk about the ecosystem, we got to think about things that impacts our ability to have a good night's sleep, which I think is having a supportive housing. Being able to have a comfortable place to live that's structured. You have people out here saying, "Oh, I got a recovery house with 3 bedrooms, um, 4 bunk beds in each room, and one bathroom."
Mm,
For me, it's really identifying the right house that has the right fit for the individual, but also things that, house that has rules and regulations, a supportive house where other individuals in long-term recovery lives, and they begin to support the newer person who lives in that house. Sometimes they provide bus tickets, sometimes they have meals, sometimes they help with job leads and things like that. So supportive housing, I think, is important depending upon who you are. Everybody don't need it, but it was an important aspect of my life because I lived in a supportive recovery house for nearly 2 years when I first got clean,
Yeah.
and it was the best thing. I needed somewhere to sleep, somewhere to eat, and somewhere that had a brotherhood type environment where we were all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really built some strong relationships, and it's just a safe environment. That's
Mm-hmm.
what's important. Safety is
Yeah.
important. I,
Yeah.
I talk about trauma in the book. I recognize the importance of trauma and how many people have had so many traumatic experiences. And so it's really taking a deep dive and exploring and getting the support we need as it relates to trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and how trauma impacts everybody differently. Working in the field of SUD, I realized that the 70% of men are in recovery and 30% were women. And then out of the 30% of women who were in recovery, 80% of them had experienced some traumatic experiences,
Yeah.
sexual abuse, physical abuse, etc. And in some cases, men have experienced the same thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, again, this book is a tool to really open your eyes to explore who you are as an individual. And some of this stuff may fit and some of it don't. But we know a lot of it can't fit.
Right. Right. And I think it's probably where you are in your journey, what you can take or need more or less of, and that will shift over time as well.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you out of the because we could go through every single one of these and that would be a whole webinar, which we're not doing. So um, if you had to share with people out of like how to think about their ecosystem and when to know when to tap in or tap out, like how do people know how to do that? Do they do that in community? Do they do that with the support of another, whether it be a mentor, sponsor, friend, family member? How does that work? Or is it sort of sitting alone with yourself and doing your own internal assessment of what you need? Like, what are your thoughts?
Excellent, excellent question, Karis. I think it's multi approach. One is you can do it with the recovery coach, you can do it with the sponsor, a family, or a friend that has supported you, a spiritual advisor. I think this book, in fact, I am working on a workbook that's going to be the companion to the book itself. Ideally, for me, it's a tool. It's a tool that can help individuals who are on their journey and their path of recovery. And it's no wrong way or no right way. It's just taking a look at your ecosystem, taking
Yeah.
an honest assessment of who you are, and understand who you are is indicative of your experiences that you've had throughout your life. And most of your experiences in your childhood often shape and impact the type of relationships we have as an adult.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this conversation, I'm wondering, if you have one piece of, we call it wisdom dropping, one piece of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience, sort of it can be a call to action, it could be inspirational, it could be whatever. Like what one piece of wisdom do you want to leave our audience with?
The thing that resonates with me is something that a guy by the name of Deacon Frank Johnson said to me many years ago. And I remember I was at a crossroad trying to figure out life, so to speak. And he said three simple things: don't give in, don't give up, and don't give out. And that still resonates with me 30 some years later. And that's my approach to life. That's my approach to endeavors. That's my approach to challenges. That's my approach to whatever it is that I'm trying to strive for.
Powerful, powerful last words. Snap, clap, thumbs up, the whole 9 yards, as I say. Want to thank you so much, Andre, for joining me on Unapologetically Black Unicorns. We'll leave a link to the book so people can check it out. But I really want to, thank you for giving of your time. I know it took us a while to finally make this happen, but we made it happen. Yay!
Unapologetically.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Unapologetically, we made it happen. So thanks for joining. And to our listeners, y'all know what to do. Garrett, my producer, always says like, subscribe, comment, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, okay. But most important is to share the podcast because there's somebody out there who needs to hear this important information. And with that, We'll see you next week on Unapologetically Black Unicorns.